in the City Council and do it as a joint meeting, but it's essentially a presentation of the Community Development Housing budget, which encompasses housing programs under the authority as well as their other activities in the general fund.
So,
I will say that Mrs. Parazian was not didn't know about this, nor did I. And I started to leave, and Mrs. Blake stopped me. And I don't think she knew.
so, Frank, do you want to call the council?
We'll call to order the budget study session, May 19th, 2009, 2010, for community development and housing. May we have a roll call for the city council, please?
Council members Raymond.
Here.
Friedman.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Mayor Quintero.
Here.
And roll call for the Housing Authority.
Authority members Raymond.
Here.
Friedman.
Here.
Mincy.
Here.
Parazian. Quintero.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Chairman Najarian.
Here.
Mr. Kasakian, do you have a report?
According to this, we do. It's Director of Community Development and Housing and Director of Finance regarding discussion of fiscal year 2009-2010 Housing Authority and Redevelopment Agency city budgets, but I believe it is only the Housing Authority.
Mr. Starbird.
And I'll go to Madeline Blake. Madeline.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, members of the Housing Authority. We were slotted to do our department budget presentation during this time slot rather than the morning budget study session. So I will be reviewing the whole department and then at the end talking a little bit about specifically housing and the housing programs. Let me first say that the Department of Community Development and Housing was formed 25 years ago, almost exactly 25 years ago. And this will be my last budget session, and as such, I just want to say that it has been an honor to have been the director of this department for the past 25 years. We have accomplished a lot. The department was formed initially in response to changing community needs. It was formed at a time when there was mass immigration. Almost 40,000 people came into this community. Tremendous density increases overnight. And as such, this department was formed to respond to a lot of the issues that emerged as a result of changing demographics, increased density, increased crowding, and it started just as a grant administration department in 1984. And gradually, other divisions were added to the department as community needs emerged. The first being neighborhood services, and that actually was initiated by Councilman Larry Zarian, because as density increased and there were more issues out in the community, it was felt that we needed a proactive approach to code enforcement and a more problem-solving approach to code enforcement. At the time, code enforcement was just in building and safety, and it was a response-only type of operation. And as you know, neighborhood services has really come to address a lot of the quality of life issues. The mission of the department is to build strong communities physically, socially, and economically, and that is what we have been doing over the last 25 years. It was also in the late 80s that the Affordable Housing Unit was formed. A decision was made to have one division that dealt with affordable housing issues, both from the standpoint of the development of new affordable housing as well as Section 8. So it was a time when, just as the legislation changed and 20% of the redevelopment set-aside was required to be used for affordable housing, that it was determined that the Housing Authority would have authority over the housing funds, that is both the redevelopment set-aside as well as the federal development funds as well as Section 8. So as I say, the department has grown and evolved in response to a lot of the changes in the community, and it has been an honor and a privilege to have been the department head of this department for the last 25 years. The core services of the department, affordable housing, as I just described. In the last 25 years, we've built 18 affordable housing rental projects. We have 2,900 Section 8 vouchers. 1,500 were actually out of Los Angeles, but they were initiated by this housing authority to contact L.A. There were people who actually live in Glendale who were able to get L.A. vouchers. So we brought about 1,500 additional vouchers to the people in Glendale. And we have built 6 Habitat for Humanity projects, 29 units. Another one of the core services is quality of life. As I mentioned, neighborhood services was really initiated to address quality of life issues from the standpoint of neighborhood problem solving and code enforcement. And out of that has come the shopping cart ordinance, one of the only ones in the state, and the most recent fresh air ordinance, smoking ordinance, which is still in the outreach and education phase. Neighborhood planning and neighborhood problem solving is another one of the core services of the department. Over time, this department initiated the neighborhood planning for the neighborhood task force, which resulted in the joint school-city project, bringing together residents, school district, and city people to result in the Pacific Park. And the department also was responsible for initiating the original neighborhood planning for the Adams Square Revitalization Project, bringing together multiple stakeholders, including merchants and residents and schools and the community college and other institutions. The department was initially formed to address grant and contract administration. At the time, it was just CDBG and workforce. At this time, the grants are approximately $34-35 million, and so grant and contract administration is a major function of the department. Case management and direct services. Over the past 25 years, the Homeless Coalition was evolved, and out of that came the Homeless Continuum of Care, starting with outreach on the streets. At the time, at the 25 years ago, there was one transitional housing project, and that was with the Salvation Army. And today we have the emergency shelter path Achieve at Fernando Court. We have transitional housing. We have permanent housing, and a well put together coalition of service providers that provide services to the homeless community, as well as direct services at the Verdugo Job Center, where they see approximately 9,000 people a month who are looking for employment services, as well as the Glendale Youth Alliance. The last of the core services is coordinating social services, which primarily occurs through the Community Development Block Grant process. In many ways, the department brokers a lot, brings together, whether it's neighborhood planning or social services, or bringing together workforce and training agencies to identify what are the proper training programs for the community in response to the labor market. I would say, if I could define the function, that is a major function that we have played over the last 25 years and continue. This is just the organization chart. There are 4 divisions: workforce development, housing, community development block grant, and neighborhood services, all of which perform the core services that I just described. These are the major functions of each of those divisions, which I have talked about. One thing I didn't mention in terms of housing is the monitoring. We have a monitoring unit that's responsible for monitoring all of our affordable housing projects. And one of the elements of quality of life and neighborhood services that I neglected to mention that is an important one, and that's the centralized request for service for the city. And just last week, Neighborhood Services went live with CSI, which is the new centralized automated system for for requests. I talked about CDBG and homeless, where we coordinate 30 social service agencies to fulfill the goals and objectives of the Community Development Block Grant Program. And I mentioned workforce development, which provides job services to approximately 9,000 people monthly, and including the Glendale Youth Alliance and youth employment programs. Just the major highlights for the past year: provided employment services to over 50,000 people, emergency housing and case management in the homeless continuum of care to 1,800 individuals or households, the adoption of the smoking fresh air ordinance, initiated the first volunteer-led community garden, and currently we have 7 affordable housing projects in the development, some form of the development phase. In terms of the budget, what you will see is that less than 4% of the community development budget is general fund. However, we have adhered to the budget reductions over the last couple of years. Last year's 2008-2009 budget, and it's primarily neighborhood services, reduced the budget by eliminating one customer service rep, just over $60,000. At the same time, the City Council restored a code enforcement neighborhood services inspector position at $97,000. Neighborhood services, again, mid-year, took the full 5% cut and eliminated, as part of the action the council took in March, eliminated a vacant program specialist position. This was a position that supervised the court referrals, so that position was eliminated. Also, the City Council added one-time funding for the fresh air ordinance. That was a one-time funding for this year, and allocated $105,000 for the community outreach for that. The total budget for the department is $38 million. As I mentioned, 91% of that is grant or special revenue funds. 3.7% is general fund direct allocation, and 5% is general fund self-sustaining, and I will explain that in just one second. This is how the department is broken up, the $38 million, almost $3 million neighborhood services, 5.6 for CDBG, 23.8 for housing, and 5.5 for workforce. So the bulk of the funding is, well, almost half of it, more than half, is Section 8. The department is prepared to reduce the budget by an additional 2.5% as requested. It would be $26,500, and it would be proposed that we would reduce contract services, and that's for DataQuick, because we're anticipating that CSI will be up to speed with the assessor's roles, and so we could reduce that contract as well as reducing hourly wages. In terms of the total general fund, it's just $3.3 million, and as I indicated, it's direct, which is the money that comes directly from the general fund, and self-sustaining. And the self-sustaining, it comes from two places. Predominantly, it comes from the Glendale Youth Alliance. The young people go to work, and money is generated as they work, and that money goes into the general fund. And so that's about $1.8 million that the youth employment program generates on an annual basis, and that we call that self-sustaining. At the same time, neighborhood services generates about $196,000 just through the CCBG, the Glendale Community Advisory, CCBG, Committee on Citizen. It's the beautification, Clean and Beautiful Glendale, and they do quite a bit of fundraising, and they raise about $196,000 a year. Moving on more specifically to the affordable housing funds, $42.7 million. This includes carryover, and as you can see, 63% of that is Section 8, so that is the bulk of it. The redevelopment set-aside is about 20%. Home is about 12%, and then supportive housing, SHP, is the homeless funding, and that's about 5%. And how that's divided up, $33 million is for renter housing, and that again is predominantly Section 8. There's about $5 million available for new construction next year for renters, and that will be predominantly the home funds, as I've indicated. The $1.5 million will be allocated to ownership housing, $2.1 million to supportive housing. That is the as I said, it's the homeless continuum of care. $1.2 million for code enforcement. That is redevelopment set-aside funding that supports the code enforcement program, and $4.4 million for program management for Section 8 and for the Housing Development Department. These are the programs proposed for next year's housing budget. Again, it's $42.7 million with the carryover, $24 million for Section 8. Other rental assistance are two programs that are actually located at the Verdugo Job Center, and that's the Life Wrap program that was initiated a few years ago, where working people get a little boost in rental assistance, and as they participate in training. That program was actually initiated by the mayor, and it is actually a quite successful program. New construction, there will be $5.6 million available next year for new construction. Housing rehab, almost $1 million. First-time home buyer, again, the supportive housing, code enforcement. We'll have an annual loan payment for our $14 million loan of just over $3 million annually for the next 5 years, and program management. In terms of future challenges, there are caps on the funding on planning and administration as well as social services, and I say this because we've had some discussions about the cost allocation plan, and basically the $34 million in grants that come in provide a lot of service to the community, and the city basically supports, other than about I think we pay for 5.5 staff people in other departments with the administrative funds. But some of the internal services are provided in support of this grant funding. Grant funding uncertainty this year, we were fortunate to get $5 million as part of the economic stimulus funding, but it's up and down. We expect about a 10% increase in our grant funding as a result of more attention from the current administration on the types of activities that are provided. But again, we are subject to fluctuations. Possible department reorganization and impacts, just relative to discussions on the reorganization. There really won't be any cost savings. There probably will be functional alignments, so that's the trade-off. Some of the challenges just have to do with currently the divisions, most of them being federally funded, are kind of integrated financially, and so there will be some impact on trying to unravel that. And just the impact on people. There are 100 staff people in the department, and as discussions occur on reorganization, people are always concerned, of course, what's going to happen to me. So just in terms of having a thoughtful transition of whatever occurs, I think will be important because, as I say, it's a lot of people. Increased service for code enforcement. We've talked about increased attention on code enforcement, and so that will present, I know the city attorney mentioned the same thing, that will provide some possibly additional resources, but maybe rethinking how the enforcement is conducted. Limited funding available for affordable housing development for the next 5 years. As I indicated, we're paying off the $14 million loan, so there will be minimal set aside. We'll probably get about $2.5 million a year from federal home money. And we put financial capacity of nonprofits because they're, of course, always being challenged. We do our best to try to increase their capacity, so we see that as one of the challenges, particularly in this difficult economy. And that's it. Again, as I say, 25 years, it has been an honor and a privilege to have been the department head of this department.
Okay, thank you. I have a few questions, and I'm sure so do the others. My first question on the general fund, direct allocation on page 5, then general fund self-sustaining. The general fund direct allocation, what programs are that, $1,398,000?
Yes, that is neighborhood services, code enforcement, and $169,000 to the youth employment programs.
Our contribution to
Yes.
GYA.
Yes, that's correct.
And then the self-sustaining?
The self-sustaining is,
GYA?
right, it's $1.8 million is generated by the youth employment programs, and $196,000 is generated by neighborhood services.
In the form of fines or fundraising?
Mostly fundraising.
And then the first-time home buyers, now with the downturn in the economy, the collapse of the real estate market, how is that program doing?
Well, that's a good question. It has obviously been very slow over the last few years. We are hoping it'll be increasing, but I think I'll ask Ann Bockenkamp to address that. She supervises that program.
Because obviously in a hot market, it was hard to
It was
find.
very hard.
Now it may be a different.
This year, so far, we funded one first-time home buyer loan for a single person buying a one-bedroom condominium, which is really the market we can best serve right now. And we had a home buyer class Saturday, and it was attended by about 65 people. The interest is strong, but prices are not coming down as people are expecting them to. So it's a challenge, but there is a small market that we can serve.
So in the last fiscal year, you closed one loan?
One first-time home buyer loan, correct. We continue to service about 125 existing
Of
loans.
the old ones. And how many people work in that program?
We have one person working in that program,
One full-time person.
as well as doing other administrative duties.
Well, that's a question. So in addition to that program, they also do other,
They're working on loan servicing and assisting with other projects.
right. Okay. And then the supportive housing, how many families or individuals do we have been placed or currently a supportive housing program?
The supportive housing program is the continuum of care, and I'm going to ask Jess. So I think we've had 1,800 in the last year throughout the entire system, both in the emergency shelter and in the transitional housing. I don't have it broken out by housing project, but we've had 1,800, either individuals or families served.
And then the program that was put together in terms of working families to try to help them through the process, not only of buying homes, but just generally increasing their livelihood, so to speak. That's still...
Yes, that's still, and that's actually a great program, and in this economy, it's even a better program, and we're looking to kind of create a similar kind of program with the homeless prevention money and the workforce money as part of the economic stimulus. She's got about 50 families on that program.
right, those are my only questions. Any questions? Ms. Friedman?
What is the qualifications to become a code enforcer? City.
The code enforcement, neighborhood services inspector, they need ICBO certification. I'll have to ask Sam Engel to give you the specifics on that, but I'm pretty sure they do.
Councilmember Friedman, members of the City Council, members of the Housing Authority. Code enforcement officers are required to have a high school education. They are required to have a certification from the International Code Council, either as a combination inspector or at a bare minimum certified in housing inspection. They're also required to have what's called PC 832, which is powers of arrest, which is certification from the California Peace Officers Standards Council, so that they have the ability to issue citations legally. Those are the three primary minimum requirements. In addition to that, they're required under our local requirements, which were established by our Civil Service Commission, to have the ability to read, speak, and write and communicate effectively, to be able to prepare reports, to be able to use computers. Those are the typical types of things that are be required for all of our positions.
I was just surprised to see the salary, honestly. 97,000.
That's not just a salary, Councilwoman Freeman. That would include the benefit package as well as the salary.
Okay.
Yes, and they're commensurate with building inspectors. There's a series of positions across the city organization that are compensated at that range,
Okay.
with the code enforcement officer being one in the series.
Probably back off 35 or 40% for the indirect benefits, health insurance, workers' comp, retirement costs, those kinds of
Good
things.
to know that was all included in this number. I wasn't sure. So thanks. I don't know if this question is for you or for Madeline. We talked at one point about raising our ability to fine for certain types of code violations, so that if it's, that we at least have the ability, if there's intent, if someone builds without permit knowingly, to do higher levels of fines to try to both discourage that kind of activity and to raise revenue. Where are we with that?
Councilwoman Friedman, members of the City Council, members of the Housing Authority. First off, we don't fine to raise revenue, and I will make that publicly clear.
Okay.
A lot of people are watching.
That's your story, and
That's my story, and we're sticking to it. We do fine as an incentive and an encouragement to comply with the law, and it is a very effective incentive. It is not a revenue producer, and we don't look at it that way because it would imply that our officers are on some sort of quota or anything else, which they're not. Their goal is compliance, and that's consistent with the instruction that they've received from the council over the years. That said, we are bringing a couple of things to you in the next month and a half, probably about the next month and a half to 2 months, that is consistent with your direction to provide some additional incentives, as we just talked about, for people to comply. The first one comes up tonight on your agenda, and that is the authorization from the City Council to our code enforcement staff to implement the authority granted to the city by the state legislature to go after lenders who have abandoned foreclosed properties in our city. And there's about 500 of them right now. Most of them are cared for, some of them are not. We have the ability to recover some of our costs in that, and presumably you'll have the opportunity to review that tonight. Second, coming up within the next month and a half will be a proposed program for your review on administrative citations, which gets to what your exact question is it gives us the ability to go after different types of violations relative to their severity and their impact. And you'll be able to give us, I think, some appropriate direction on how we want to proceed with a fining program for those types of violations.
Thank you, Mr. Engel, and thank you for the clarification. And that was why I worded it. I try to word it that way to give us the ability so that we can use discretion. And we can be sensitive when people make honest mistakes or are trying to correct something.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's all. Thank you.
Mr. Najarian.
A couple questions. Madeline, it looks like this budget cycle you've been requested to reduce 2.5%. Other departments have been hit with a 5% number. Is there, or Mr. Starber, is there a reason why?
We already took our 5%. We took our full 5%.
Sure.
If you look at, let me go back, slide,
Page 4.
this one, yeah.
0809.
Yeah, 0809, we eliminated the customer service rep. Then the 5% reduction was a $65,000 reduction in the eliminating the program specialist. So that was our 5% for this year. In addition to last year's budget, we eliminated one. This was our 5%. So
You eliminated last year for credit for this year.
No, this was our mid-year, along with when you eliminated those positions mid-year. When that 5% was presented to all of us, our dollar amount was $65,000, and so we took our 5% reduction. I mean, we experienced it. Some departments haven't yet taken their full 5%. They aren't able to, or whatever.
You recall the bulk of the savings this year is the hard freeze. So we identified 5% reductions that have to flow into next year, and the hard freeze will continue until the 5% is fully implemented. So we generated kind of one-time savings this year. They get permanently in place as we go into this next budget year and backed up by the hard hiring freeze to make sure we achieve it.
During criminal prosecution, police officers, for the most part, receive overtime for their appearances in court. Do our CDH staff have the same thing when they have to appear in court?
I don't believe so, but
Councilman Najarian, members of the council, and the Housing Authority, because our staff mostly works a standard schedule, they're not on the staggered schedule like the police officers do. I can't recall during my tenure here, which is 18 years at this point, where we've ever paid overtime for a court appearance, because it happens, it coincides with their shift. The only time that it wouldn't would be if it were to fall on their staggered Fridays, and I can't recall that that's ever happened. So we're not paying overtime for court appearances.
How about the Great Glendale cleanup? I know you do a lot of community events and you're out there painting. Do we pay overtime for those hours?
Mayor Najarian, members of the City Council, whenever we make an offer of employment to any employee in neighborhood services, the offer of employment is made with the requirement that they will work weekends and evenings. We've made that with every employee since 1989, so that every employee who works in neighborhood services, if we have a Saturday or an evening schedule, pursuant to the provisions of the Memorandum of Understanding with the employee associations, they're provided the 2-day notice, and their schedule is adjusted, so we're paying no overtime.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you very much. What's next?
But before we move on, I just wanted to once again thank Ms. Blake for her work to the city over the years. You brought idealism and a vision to this department and to the city that I think is going to be irreplaceable. And I think that you see it in all of those projects, the Habitat projects and all of the other really wonderful projects that you brought to the city. So I think we owe you a great debt, and just want to acknowledge that.
thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Weaver.
I just want to say, Madeline, it's been a great pleasure to work with you over the last going on 13 years. You've always been accessible. We've had some tough times within the city that you've had to deal with, and you've done them admirably. I know conferences I went away to where we would have presentations by Housing Authority from across the state, and what brought up about Glendale. Glendale walked on water. That we are far ahead of every other city and what we were doing, and was really admired by the other cities. I know you got that feedback at different times, so I hope you really enjoy your retirement. Don't do the kind of retirement I've been doing for the last 8-9 years. Do real retirement with your family and enjoy the coming years.
Well, as a farewell, I'd like to comment on the last 4 years that I've known you and worked with you. Many times the council has these idealistic notions of pushing projects through affordable housing to be a prime example, and we tell you we want it, and we want it done now, and we don't care if there's a deadline. And I know we've given you heartburn you and your staff many times, but we do appreciate your commitment to, and let's use affordable housing, because oftentimes that's where we're perhaps discussing some of the most at the most energetic levels. I personally appreciate that. It has really gone a long way in filling a much-needed gap in the housing that we have here in the city, and I think the community appreciates that. And it goes without saying that we all of us here do as well.
Mr. Draymond.
Well, I don't want to take a number, but I want to jump in. I think you're marvelous to work with, Madeline, and I appreciate the interest and attention that you've brought to your work. But I want to echo a couple of things that Council Member and Authority Member Najarian just said, particularly with the affordable housing, and even beyond the Herculean deadlines sometimes. It's one of the things that I've been most impressed about our organization since coming here. Whatever the other controversies are that swirl around council and so on, with regard to affordable housing, it's one of the things that this city does so well, and that we as a group do well, I believe. And it's one of the things I'm proudest of since coming here. And from my arrival here in 2007 and your helping me get oriented with regard to the Housing Authority and housing issues, I'm greatly appreciative. And to some of the smaller things like bringing community gardens forward. I don't know where I would have been without several of our meetings, you and Sam, but to be able to get that program off the ground and running would not have happened. And I greatly appreciate that, and I'm sure there are any number of stories just like that over the years. I'm sorry I come at the tail end of your tenure, but happy that I could be at least at the tail end of your tenure, and thank you so much for your work on behalf of the city.
Well, I'm not going to be the only one that doesn't say nice things about Madeline. And I have worked with her now over 10 years. I appreciate, particularly, Madeline, the support you've given to the tenant members of the council or of the authority. Always been very, very supportive. And you're right, Glendale has a wonderful reputation, and we've been able to get more things done because of the reputation and because of your department and your leadership, and we appreciate it.
Okay. What's next, Mr. Clerk?
Motion to adjourn, if there is one.
So moved.
For council?
We are adjourned for council.
For
Housing?
so moved.
Second.
Housing is adjourned.